Dear listeners of WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem, welcome to tonight's program. This is Angelo Lampousis, your host from the Department of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences at City College of New York. We have with us Aaron Sloduvnik, who is taking care of the sound. And we have also in the green room, like every Monday, our honor students. Maynard, Kari, James, Stephen, Christopher, William, Isabel, Tiffany, Matthew, Daciel, Damian, Chris, Joseph, Michael, Brianna, and Lauren. Welcome to all of our honor students who are ready to post their comments and blog about today's interview. And we also have with us a distinguished guest this week. He's the first professor who is visiting from City College. And although it's not too far to get into the studios of WHCR, there's a significance that he's the first professor from City College to visit our program. And this is the professor and chairman of the Department of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences, Dr. Jeffrey Steiner. Professor Steiner, welcome to tonight's program.
Angelo, thanks for having me.
Professor Steiner, earlier in class, and in fact, this conversation started last week through an article in The Economist, a very short and concise article by the distinguished Professor Jeffrey Sachs, who is an economist and he's the head of the Earth Institute at Columbia University. So in last week's The Economist, under the title The Next Frontier, he offers his vision for sustainable development. And it was a very interesting article in that, first of all, Professor Sachs is at the crossroads of many different disciplines, being the head of the Earth Institute, and also his involvement in projects with the United Nations, namely the Millennium Villages Project and other international projects to eradicate poverty and disease, and ultimately to meet the so-called Millennium Development Goals. There's a deadline for these goals. It's 2015. It's coming up. And in his article, he offers an overview between different sources of energy and the associated technology and science behind these methods. For example, looking for or extracting fossil fuels, he talks about fracking. He talks about deep ocean drilling. And he compares or contrasts these technologies with other technologies that potentially can ensure a so-called low-carbon world. But if you could maybe give us a little bit of background, if you would, on this process of extracting fuels. And I think you have enough background as geologists and as an earth scientist to maybe take us a little bit traditionally of how fuels have been extracted, and maybe we can come up to today to process like hydrofracking.
Okay, as you know, we stand right at this juncture at the point where new technologies are coming on board. Some of them controversial, like fracking. Others probably haven't gained the recognition yet that we might expect. For example, ice methane. In one drill hole off of India, exploratory searches have found more ice methane than enough ice methane to give the world, to give India enough fuel to last 200 years. Just one hole. So this is a technological issue because, like fracking, the recovery of these deep ocean I should say a little bit about what ice methane is. Mm-hmm. The deep ocean is very cold. And if you have seepage, for example, up through the strata, this cold water creates a network that binds methane into a solid so that you can actually, I think people know that you can actually pick it up in your hand, hold a match to it, and it will burn. Mm-hmm. So this kind of gasoline is much cleaner than certainly than coal and other kinds of purified organics. And so even though it's not really breaking with traditional fuel sources, it's much cleaner. And it's readily available. I guess there are. We could talk about this. I don't know where we're going with this, but there are issues in all of this that impact the public. For example, these safety issues with fracking are, I don't want to say, they're not extremely problematic at this point. The engineering capability exists to make them absolutely safe. Ice methane is a little bit different because if you release large amounts of bound carbon dioxide, it could actually react more or less explosively and flood the eastern seaboard, for example, with carbon dioxide, which is not toxic, but you can't breathe large quantities of it. So I don't know where you want to go with this. I have experience as a practicing geologist, even though right now our department is working more on the Earth systems concept. But
it is. I think since we have your expertise in here, live in the studio, perhaps it is worth noting a little bit of the traditional methods. A couple of years ago, there was a movie with Jerry, with the title of the movie is There Will Be Blood. It took several Oscars, and it goes over, I guess, partially fictional story of this person who was extracting oil very traditionally. Yeah. So we can, if you would, maybe for a couple of minutes, go back a little bit in time before we come forward and explain how oil has been traditionally extracted.
Well, if you go back in time, far enough, back in the 1700s, oils seeped into the shallow surface and hot spring types of areas and were considered medicinal, so that people would set up hot springs whereby you could bathe yourself in these weird exotic products and heal yourself from various kinds of diseases. And the Indians would take their gun barrels and actually just stick them into the pond and light them. And so you can imagine around the campfire they'd have all these torches lighting up the scene. So, and actually I've walked on the beaches of California, and you can see the tar actually oozing out right at the surface there in globs. So a lot of the surface oil originally was quite close to the surface. And as you know, there's really not a lot of debate about the source of those hydrocarbons. Everybody feels that the concept is that organic microfossils accumulate in an ocean environment and settle down, and all the goodies inside of the shell, the little microfauna, leak out and collect and actually migrate up because they're very buoyant. And they migrate up in the rock layers through pores and cracks and collect at points where they can't go any farther. Mm-hmm. And so the early oil mining was really quite simple. You puncture down and relieve the pressure that's holding these oils in reserve there, and they just automatically buoy to the surface. And you extract them, and that's really all that was involved. Mm-hmm. Later on, as you ran out of this readily extractable oil, you had to dump heavy liquids down there, and actually the heavy liquids would sort of force the lighter ones up, and a sort of second generation of recovery. And, you know, from my point of view, I mean, if this oil is also recoverable. I'm involved with a group that postulates that biofracking is the way to extract these materials. Biofracking is less hazardous because there really aren't any exotic chemicals, and you can turn off that fracking or turn off that fracking just by feeding bacteria. If you don't feed them, the bacteria starve and therefore shut down the process. But I don't know if you want to go in that direction.
I'm very pleased, and it has been very enlightening so far. The fact that we've heard of a couple of terms not mentioned in the article. Of course, this is not to limit in any way Professor Sachs's article. It was not exhaustive, but we've learned a little bit about ice methane and the process of biofracking. So before we come back on modern technologies, including renewable energy, methods for energy storage, carbon capture and sequestration. Overall, what has been suggested as an alternative to traditional or more modern fossil fuel type of extraction. We should, at this point, allow our listeners to have a break, allow the new listeners to tune in and have a little break and the station ID at this point.
WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. Elastic tubes and pots and pans, bits and pieces, and magic from the handle make it weird science. Things I've never seen before. Behind bolted doors, talent and imagination. Weird science. Not what teachers said to do, making dreams come true.
Dear listeners of WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem, welcome back. This is the program Innovation Unedited with you every Monday afternoon from 4 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. This is Angelo Lampousis, your host. With us today in the studio, Professor Jeffrey Steiner, Chairman of the Department of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences at City College of New York. Professor Steiner, while we're still collecting questions from the Green Room and our honor students, I think it's a good opportunity to highlight a little bit one particular course related to our discussion today. I have heard of one previous version of it, the title Oil 101, which is a very...
Okay, well, Kevin Foster is the chairman of the economics department, and he and I both firmly believe that our students should be exposed to this area of economic resources. So basically, that's the title of our course. And in that course, we pick a topic. Last time it was fracking, and we want the students to sort of debate the issue and write a term paper. But we're also trying to go farther than that and actually create a new major in that area, because we did that, our department did that with engineering and created Earth Systems and Environmental Engineering. And we think that a link between psychology, for example, economics, Earth and Atmospheric Science, and the medical school, for that matter, would bring students the information they need to compete in the area of how to balance resource issues with economic issues.
Very good. At this point, I think we're ready, and we have one of our honor students with us in the studio, Miss Lauren Zalta, who will help us today to post and read the questions submitted by our students. Welcome, Lauren.
Thank you. So we have the first question by James. What are your thoughts on thorium?
Okay. You mean how do you mine it, or it's dangerous?
We don't know for
Open-ended?
sure. Open-ended.
It's a Thor question. I know a Thor point. I really don't know how to directly answer that. Let's just say that the radioactive elements are becoming increasingly valuable as a resource, and the rare earth elements for batteries, for example, and the more exotic elements are sort of the hidden agenda of many countries. For example, Afghanistan is one of the world's leading repositories of rare earth elements. And I think this is a very significant need that the United States should address. So how is it going to train its students to actually find internal resources like that? I hope that answers it.
Mm-hmm.
The second question is by Chris. Can you speak a bit about the safety and sustainability of hydrogen fuel cells?
About the sustainability of them?
Safety.
Oh, safety.
Yeah.
Oh, this is not really in my area of expertise, but in general, I think I'm a strong advocate in over-engineering, over-design. So whether you're talking about fracking and safety issues or hydrogen cells and safety issues, there's no doubt that the technology exists to produce a safe product. And the issue is, how do you break down the barriers, whether they be company or political barriers, to make sure that the average citizen is fully protected and getting the maximum value from their resource? But on the particulars of the hydrogen cell, I really don't know.
Mm-hmm.
The third question is from Matthew. Professor Sachs mentioned a 3-step plan to transition to low carbon energy by 2050. Do you agree fully with this plan, or would you have it go a different way?
Oh, absolutely. I think you can't lose by protecting the planet at all costs. Not at all costs. Let me rephrase that, because you don't want to put people out of work to try to achieve a problematic goal. For example, I think it's well worth over 20 minutes just to look at the debate over what used to be called global warming and sustainability, because since that whole debate came to the public consciousness, well, it's been in the consciousness of earth scientists for centuries. Right now it's in the public framework, but there's a huge difference between devotees to that kind of pro and con versus just the average scientific point of view, to know whether there's an alarmist position on either side of the equation. And I think the public really should be exposed to both sides, not just in a snippet, for example, just a brief couple sentences about it, but in depth. What do we really know about it? But you can't be against the idea of going towards renewable and sustainable energy. I think that should be a very high priority.
The fourth question is from Manoj. What kinds of bacteria are used in the process of biofracking?
Excellent question. Mm-hmm. What you do in all of these areas, because what I'm very interested in is resources. So you could look at all metals as resources. Some of them are rare, platinum, gold, thorium, and some of them are not. But the process of using bacteria is very interesting. What you have to do is not create a superbug, but rather go to a local environment where you want to extract oils from a particular formation. For example, one that has already been, quote, mined, but there's a reserve there that was not touched. All right. You can guarantee that colonies of bacteria are already at work utilizing that material. So the idea is to promote that particular type of colony to sort of do what you want it to do. In other words, you want it to somehow aid in the transport of deep oil to the surface. So you have essentially 4 steps. Maximizing that set for a process you want to see happen. Second, work on the engineering aspect. In other words, how do you get the bacteria at depth carrying organics to the surface, and then how do you deconstruct them to get the values out of them? It's a fascinating process, but the science of that is just now evolving, and I hope to be around long enough to actually work at a successful operation in that regard. But it requires that you get a microbiologist and bacteria specialists working with engineers, working with physical scientists and geologists to work as a team to make that kind of thing happen.
So Manoj also wants to know if there are any biochecking setups in operation right now.
No. It's on the conceptual stage. In terms of bio-extraction, there are companies that are working on gold because that's probably the most monetarily high-profile one.
Yeah.
And but no, that one is, as far as I know, hasn't been mastered yet.
And we have time for one last question.
Okay, so the last question is from Damien. Is extracting ice methane more expensive than traditional methods of extracting fuels?
That's a really good question because, first of all, these are on the bottom surface of the ocean. They have been actually scooped up in fishermen's nets and brought to the surface. So obviously there's the scrapability idea. But then the drilling and recovery, that has to go hand in hand with safety issues. And I don't know where that stands because Exxon didn't tell me. I mean, if they have to be working on this essentially full time. And I wish that there was enough disclosure that the scientific community could become involved in that, because the oceanographic institutes that exist don't have the capacity to evaluate these deep surface deposits. You need to have a company with resources like an Exxon or a Mobil or something to get down there and do the reconnaissance. And unfortunately or fortunately, that's capitalism at work, and they're developing that process.
This has been the program Innovation Unedited. This is Angelo Lampousis, your host. We have been talking to Professor Jeffrey Steiner, chairman of the Department of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences at City College of New York. Professor Steiner, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much, Angelo.
And also, as a sound engineer, we had the wonderful Aaron Slodovnik. Thank you so much, Aaron, for your assistance. And the honor student today posting the questions was Ms. Lauren Zalta. Thank you, Lauren, for being with us. And thank you to all of our honor students in the green room. Stay tuned. They're very interesting shows following up this one.
Zone Radio Station, WHCR 90.3 FM.